Robin Freeman. He's the well, most of you already know him. He runs the environmental program at Merritt. This is the Merritt's 50th anniversary, and this is one of the reasons that we're having this lecture series. Go ahead, Robin, you take it away.
Okay. So for the students, I guess most everybody is a student. So if you didn't remember to sign up, the roll sheet is over there and the research sheet is next to it. And welcome and thank you for coming as speakers and guests. See, the bathrooms here are right next to them. I mean, you just go out the door and turn right, and the restrooms are there. We'll have a chance for question and answers with the speakers. And thank you all for bringing snacks, which are all around, and more coming in. Did anybody have any problems with parking? So there's the. Okay, so that's open. And we're honored to have PCTV here with so when he gets a chance to edit the footage tonight, it'll be archived online at PCTV. And thank you, Wendy and Krista and Sue and for organizing this lecture and the ones that are coming up. The theme of this 50th anniversary lecture series is learning to live in cities, 50 years of taking care of the future. So this is the 50th anniversary, as Wendy said, of the Environmental Management and Technology program, and I realized while I was working on these lectures that we've been about 20 years ahead of the curve all the time, and the students are people who find their way here on their own initiative, because it's not a trend. Every once in a while there's a trend, and there's solar, the million solar jobs. Of course, the trends are always bubbles, like we know about bubbles. So suddenly there'll be 50 people turn up, and then a bubble bursts, and that's all over. And then there would be hazardous materials, millions of jobs, same thing. And what were some of the others? There was energy in the 70s, same thing. And but we've had a comprehensive program that's continued on with looking at everything in this kind of emerging field. And so I realized that we've actually been predicting the future. And so far we've been accurate pretty much 100%. So everything that we do here, a number of years later, 10 to 20 years later, becomes sort of more mainstream. So what we're talking about tonight, we're hoping, we're predicting a future that, as we're kind of discovering this and enriching it, that it'll become part of the future. So the classes, our Introduction to Healthy Community Systems class is hosting us tonight, and that we, in the class, is applying these concepts to the San Leandro Creek Corridor as our lab in East Oakland, and that goes through East Oakland, San Leandro, and the regional parks up to Lake Chabot, and the social part of it is called Greenworks Forum that we're working on, and so there's some information on that panel in the back about the creek. City. So in 1800, when my great-grandmother, and students have heard this more than once probably, was a young woman, 3% of the people in the world lived in cities. And the cities were empires and fiefdoms. They were large slave and military enterprises, but the world was actually profoundly rural. Now, the other 97% had very little to do with cities, even though whatever the particular empire was, they'd say, oh, you know, you're in this empire, but most of the people paid no attention to it, had nothing to do with it. They knew that they'd get raided every once in a while. But now, 50% of the world's populations live in cities. Much of that has happened in the last 50 years during my lifetime. And this is a powerful change. It's changed our food sources, it's changed our shelter, and the invention of jobs away from where we live is one of the byproducts of cities. And of course, we've created vast landscapes of pavement. And most important, it changes how we raise our children. But the good news is that the ways of thriving in cities are emerging from millions of groups around the world, most notably on neighborhood and small scales. And hopefully, if we do predict the future, it's going to be the integration of these millions of small enterprises, nonprofits, efforts of all sorts, some of them within agencies and some of them in private nonprofits, that will link together and change the shared social narrative and how we live in cities. And tonight we'll be looking at some inspiring examples of what I'm talking about, and also in the back there's the 50th anniversary brochure, which talks about our classes and this program and the future lectures. You're welcome to explore these further and participate in our program. So thank you very much for coming again.
Thank you, Robin. So the first speaker up tonight is Eric. He is the Executive Director of Youth and of YES, Youth Enhancement Strategies, and I'll let him talk more about his program. So everybody welcome Eric.
Thank you very much for having me tonight. It's been a pleasure. I met Wendy a couple of years ago, and she told me about the program that a lot of you are going through, and I have to be truthful and say that in that moment, I wanted to quit my job and just go back to school, because it sounded like what you guys were doing was so cool. The interdisciplinary approach that looks at environment and sustainability in an urban community, and to what Robin was saying, you know, it really is. We're looking at the next 50 years of our future, and I think, you know, to thrive in a changing landscape, we're going to have to come together, and a lot of the information and learning that you're doing through this program is going to inform you. So I've had the pleasure of being affiliated with Youth Enrichment Strategies, or YES, for the last 8 years, both as a volunteer and as an executive director. And we serve, our purpose is to get youth and families from Richmond out into nature. Our mission is to immerse underserved youth and families in nature by providing discovery experiences that build self-confidence and strengthen relationships. And tonight what I'm going to talk about is really the health benefits of being outdoors, which a lot of you already know about, and also what makes nature relevant for our youth, particularly our low-income youth who are living in urban communities, and not only the youth, but the families as well. So let me give you a little brief background about YES and myself, and then I'll get into that. YES has been around for, I think we're in our 13th year now. We started in 1999. And during that time, we've sent over 4,000 low-income youth from Richmond and surrounding West Contra Costa County to residential summer camps all over the Bay Area and Northern California. During that time, we've also brought over 800 families down to weekend family camps that are offered 5 times a year for low-income elementary schools in Richmond. We also do youth and adult leadership programming in the outdoors, specifically with an environmental stewardship approach. We do a lot of service learning projects in the outdoor, and it's about bridging their experiences outdoors in nature back to their community, where there are several green efforts going on locally. And then the last thing that we do is we provide healthy eating and active living workshops or HEAL workshops to our adult community. For me personally, the outdoors has always been a place of wonder, and I'm from Colorado, and if any of you have been to Colorado, we're surrounded by nature, and I had the privilege of growing up in an area where I didn't need to think twice about getting outdoors. It was just there. Later on in life, when I was in my mid-20s, I was a youth mentoring coordinator up in the Colorado Rockies. I lived up in Summit County, which is about 9,000 feet. And I worked very closely with a lot of Latino youth whose parents had come to the county to work in the resort and the construction industry, which is booming back right around 2000. And it was a great job. I got to travel around a lot, be outdoors. And a couple times each year, we would do outdoor trips with the youth. And I had my own mentee who was about 12 years old. And on one experience, we went on a 5-day backpacking trip up into the Gore Range, which is a section of the Rockies, gets up to about 13,000 feet. And we pulled up in this van, and all the kids got out, and the adults got out. And my mentee was the last one out. He threw off his backpack and he kicked it. He said, "I'm not walking." I said, "No way am I doing this trip." We were about ready to go 13 miles into the wilderness, not even following a trail, taking a goat trail. He said, "I'm not doing it." And I realized in that moment that I hadn't prepared him well. I mean, we had been in a mentor-mentee relationship for about 4 years, but we hadn't done anything like this before. And I realized that I had let him down by not really preparing him for that experience. You can't just take a kid from the city, even though it wasn't even the city, but a kid who was unprepared for that and throw him into the outdoors. Well, we finally got him up and walking, and we made it to camp that night, and he was starting to sort of get into the experience a little bit more. And by day 3, this kid was leading a group of 20 of us through a keyhole at 13,000 feet. He was catching trout out of the streams. He was building his own tent. I mean, he went through this transformation that we've all seen, we've all talked about, you know, and it doesn't take a lot. It just took him being outdoors and being in a very supportive setting where his challenges turned to strengths, where his anxiety and his preoccupations gave way to enthusiasm and receptivity. And it was a beautiful thing to see. In fact, when we got down to the parking lot on the last day, his backpack was heavier than he started. And I'm thinking, we all know it's heaviest when you start out. Well, he had brought down 2 giant stones that he had found up around our camp because he'd fallen in love with these rocks and he wanted to take them home. So we got down, we got on the van, we went back home, and when we arrived, his dad was waiting there. And his dad was not looking happy. And really, I think what the situation was that he was jealous. He was jealous that he didn't have that experience with his son. And the only way that he knew how to respond was yelling at him. He said, "Get in the car, we're going home." And I just saw my mentee's face go from elation and enthusiasm and wonder to, being dejected, and that sort of look of anger came back on his face. And it broke my heart to see him go through this transformation and then have to let it go so quickly at the other end. And he's 12 years old. He didn't have a way to process that. So when I came out to California, by happenstance, I got involved with this organization that involved the family. These family camp weekends bring both the youth and the parents into nature. And I think that is so important as a lesson about how do we acclimate our youth into experiences that are going to be with them for the rest of their lives. if they're not going home and having that support from their parents who can relate to them through that experience, then it's not going to set them up for success in being stewards and appreciating the outdoors later on in life. So, so family camp and the model that Yes has, I think is a strong one. We're constantly tweaking it. We're building in new incentives and new ways to have people enjoy the experience. But it's really around team building. We do a lot of team building on the outdoors, and we allow people to discover things on their own. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the population that we work with in Richmond, it looks very much like Oakland. It's predominantly Latino and African American. 100% of the families that we work with are low income. The youth qualify for the free and reduced lunch program. A lot of the parents and the youth that we work with are obese and overweight. There are asthma, diabetes, heart conditions. These are all big medical issues that we see when people fill out their applications to come down to camp. And I think that one of the other things that people, the reason why people are reluctant to come outdoors in the first place is there's a trauma. There's a trauma of the street. People are accustomed to hearing sirens and ambulances and gunshots in their neighborhoods. All of you probably know about the Chevron disaster that happened on August 6th, where a pipe burst and a huge black smoke cloud came out and covered our neighborhoods and dropped particulate in the air and down on people's houses, caused a lot of health issues and conditions. So there's no incentive to go outside, right? People are fearful to go out on the street because of what's happening in their immediate environment. So to get people outdoors into green spaces is a number, or our beginning challenge. But I think once people come outside and they see what nature has to offer and they see that it's a safe environment that we're bringing them to, then they open up to that experience. We'll go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what Richard Louv, all of you know who Richard Louv is? Okay, some of you do, some of you don't. He's a great author. You see his books floating around the room tonight. Merritt can tell you all about Richard. She probably had the luxury of seeing him in person a few times. He's a great author. He's written quite a few books, but his latest books have been on talking about nature and how it impacts us on a human level, on a social level. He wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. That book came out in 2005, and then The Nature Principle came out in 2011. And he talks about the mind-body-nature connection and making the nexus between these three things. And there is more and more research being done about the impact of nature on our physical and mental health. And a lot of the research is correlative as opposed to causal, but there's more research that's being done every day, and I think it's the research that has been done is significant. So as far as physical health goes, we know that the greener the neighborhood is, the lower the BMI, the body mass index. That directly correlates to being overweight and obese or being in shape. Vitamin D, the vitamin we get from being outdoors from the sun. When we have more vitamin D and we get what we need, we're physically stronger, and it reduces the risks of things like diabetes, infectious diseases, autoimmune diseases. Also, being outdoors in nature raises our endorphins. We get feelings of euphoria. We also feel calm when we're outdoors. So it has a great impact on physical health. Generates, going back to the psychological well-being, the mental health piece. We know that exposure to natural environments enhances our ability to cope with and recover from stress and recover from illness and injury. People have a more positive outlook on life and higher life satisfaction when in proximity to nature, particularly people from urban areas who aren't getting it as much as people who live in rural areas. And for children, symptoms of ADD and ADHD get much better. when immersed in nature. And the other thing that Richard talks a lot about in his first book is creativity. Our creativity increases tenfold when we go into nature, because we have the ability to manipulate our environment, to see our environment beyond a single screen, right, which we're exposed to 12 to 14 hours a day. We see beyond, and it also helps your eyesight. That's one of the other things that I read. That people who are outdoors more often are less nearsighted than people who are looking at a computer screen. We have an area at our family camp called the Wild Zone, and Wild Zones may be something that you've heard of as well. Karen and David Payne, two folks from the Bay Area, have introduced Wild Zones all over the world, and they're basically places where you have unstructured play. And so you have an environment, you throw in some tools, and you let the kids go to work. And they're building rock cairns, and they're building tree forts, and they're building leaf animals, and they're doing boat races in streams, and they're creating in these environments. And it's really cool to see a group of kids sort of stumble down from a walk and be like, there's nothing to do down here. And 10 minutes later, you come in, and they're just exploding with this energy and designing all these things and just having a ball. So creativity. The last one, building social networks. I think that, from our standpoint, from my experience, we really focus on making camp a multicultural and multi-generational environment where through our team building activities, we're fomenting these cultural bonds that maybe didn't exist before. We asked people on their surveys after camp, did you make a new friend this weekend? And almost everybody says, yes, I met somebody new, I made a new friend. And that's a really core, essential component. And I think that the camp model that we use, and particularly outdoors, generates a lot of those values and assets and attributes that people need in their day-to-day interactions. We talk about with our summer camp program that not only do you get to discover things about yourself and increase your physical talents and grow your self-confidence, but it's the social aspect of interacting with different people from diverse backgrounds in a setting that's not dictated by noises and sounds and priorities and deadlines, where that rich interaction comes up. And so the social aspect of being in the outdoors can't be underestimated. I'm going to go to the last slide that I have here and talk a little bit about how we make the outdoors inviting and accessible. And I heard it earlier, the notion of cultural relevancy, I think, is really important. Making the outdoors relevant for anyone, really. But if you are removed from a natural setting in your day-to-day, then what is it that's going to make you get excited about coming into the outdoors? And I think that for the families that we work with, what I see is that the outdoors may not be as relevant in this moment when people are living in an urban area and they've got 3 jobs and they're just trying to put food on the table. But most of our families grew up or had grandparents or parents who were from rural settings. A lot of our Latino families are coming from rural areas in Mexico and Central America. Our African American family, I've had so many people come up to me and tell me stories about their grandparents from Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, talking about what it was like living on a farm, living in a rural area, and how they're nostalgic for those moments. And the fact that they get to share it with their kids, it's sort of like a coming home all over for them. It's like a return to their innocence. The established trust. Nobody's going to go anywhere if they don't trust you first, right? We did an urban backpacking trip with our Camp to Community youth. These are youth who are ages 14 to 17 last spring. And we walked from our office in central Richmond 45 minutes up into Alvarado Park on the south side of Wildcat. Through Wildcat, we camped overnight in Tilden by Little Farm, and then we walked to the Brazil Room, got on AC Transit, took it all the way down to downtown Berkeley, jumped on BART, took it back around to downtown Richmond, and then walked back to our office. So we completed a full circuit without having to use a car, right? We used public transportation and our own 2 legs. And for all of our youth, we had 10 youth who did it. It was their first time backpacking. I don't know if you remember, but it was the day after the Golden Gate Bridge got struck by lightning like 8 times. So we were dodging thunder and rain and all of this stuff, but the kids had a great time. They loved it. Bay Area Wilderness Training gave us shoes to navigate through the muddy flats. And before that, the youth had done an overnight camping trip in Golden Gate National Park to figure out how to set up a tent. What is it like to have a meal outdoors? What is it like to walk 3 miles to the bridge? So they'd been acclimated. They knew what they were getting into. I mean, the hardest thing for all of them was walking that distance, but they knew what they were getting into. It wasn't a totally unfamiliar territory. So that trust that was established and the previous experiences allowed them to be successful on that trip. Involving the family, I talked about it before. I just think when you involve the family in an experience like that, it allows them to be open to having their youth get involved and having them come out and participate more. Recruiting local leaders, we have a big volunteer guide component at our camps, and bringing in people from the community who have already been a part of the outdoor experience helps us, incredibly, because to see somebody from your neighborhood who's out there in nature having a blast, being self-confident, enjoying himself, to associate that back to a young person, seeing him in his shoes, I think that's a really powerful tool. And then accessing nearby nature. Richmond has got 32 miles of shoreline. I think it's the largest city in the Bay Area with the most shoreline, and we have regional parks. East Bay Regional Park District has Point Pinole, Miller Knox Shoreline, Wildcat, Alvarado. So getting people outdoors into natural areas that they can access by public transportation or walk to. We don't need to go 200 miles away to the Sierras to have that immersed experience in nature. We can do it in our own backyard. You guys can do it right here at your college. So we've got an event coming up on October 27th called Walk to Nature, and it will be based in people's neighborhoods. We'll have starting points, and people are going to walk anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5 miles to Miller Knox Regional Shoreline. A lot of them have never seen the bay before. A lot of them have not been out there. So it'll be a great event, and if you're interested, I encourage you to come and participate. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Probably went way over.
We're going to take questions after. Our next speaker is Mike Lanzo. He's the author of Playborhood, Turn Your Neighborhood into a Place for Play. His books are for sale for $10 a piece on the back, and he also has signs so that you can create an outdoor playborhood for your family as well. And I'll let him talk more about that.
I'm going to take me a second to set up here.
While he's setting up, if anybody wants to grab food in the back, you're more than welcome to do that.